You read today's video title correctly. I found a new chart that suggests the current crypto bull run is shorter than originally thought, and that's why it's essential to adjust your strategy based on that. That's why it's incredibly important for you to watch the whole thing today, especially for the beginners among you. There are actually some mistakes happening right now, especially when smaller sell-offs occur. We've seen it over the last few hours and the past 2 days. The altcoins have been bleeding a bit, and it's essential to make the right decisions now, because right now, even the smallest decision can have huge consequences when this parabolic upswing kicks in. And that's why it's essential to act correctly now, especially with the altcoins that are currently bleeding a bit. Now the first panic is starting to set in. Many are asking the question, is this it for the first upswing, whether it's with the altcoins or with Bitcoin? We're seeing a small sell-off happening right now. Of course, one can assume that 100,000 shows a strong psychological resistance. Otherwise, I will go into more charts to discuss what stage we are currently at in the altcoin market. It's really essential to pay attention to the signals from the charts in order to adjust your strategy accordingly. Otherwise, let's briefly touch on the topic of Bitcoin dominance. I'll talk about what we can expect here in the coming days and weeks. Otherwise, here's my general principle on how I will later plan my overall exit, so my exit strategy also for the altcoins. We'll also address the questions, is it still worth buying altcoins in 2024? Is it maybe worth taking some initial profits, especially when you see that smaller corrections are happening, particularly regarding the fear and greed index, which is currently at an extreme level of greed. Historically, it has often been worth taking some initial profits here, but I will fully discuss my personal strategy here, what I'm doing at the moment, whether I'm personally realizing some initial profits right now, or if I'm possibly buying heavily into certain altcoins. So we'll be addressing all those questions in today's video. Let's quickly start with a mini market update. Honestly, I'm not usually a fan of looking at a daily basis like what's Bitcoin doing. Has Bitcoin dropped by 5? What are the altcoins doing? They've also corrected a bit. It usually doesn't make much of a difference whether you do minimal macro management here. It's always best not to lose sight of the bigger picture and just look at what the overarching trend is. But nonetheless, I want to talk about this topic because I'm already seeing some early signs, whether it's in my own community, generally on Twitter, or even in the YouTube comments. People are starting to get a bit panicky again or are getting scared that the altcoins are overheated. Does it make sense to realize some initial profits now? And I can totally understand that if you don't look at the bigger picture and don't have that overarching view of the overall altcoin season, it might be a bit tough for some beginners to navigate these market phases, especially when individual altcoins are slightly correcting. And that's exactly why I'm making today's video, to show you what market stage we're actually in, especially regarding the altcoin market, so that you definitely don't lose sight of the red thread and the long-term strategy you want to have in your own portfolio. It's really important for me to address certain charts here. Otherwise, as I said, such corrections in the crypto market are completely normal. This is still nothing compared to what is probably yet to come. I can definitely show some old Bitcoin charts here. We can look at Bitcoin on a weekly basis, and we can see that even in the last bull market, we had increased sell-offs, like a drop of 20 to 30% in the previous cycle as well. So it's completely normal for individual cooling phases to happen, and for some weekly candles to turn red. In my opinion, it's actually something very positive, something very healthy for the Bitcoin chart, because what I definitely don't want is for Bitcoin to pump up in a straight line, which would later lead to a massive correction, because sooner or later, individual corrections have to happen. The market can only build up healthily in the long term if there are also small interim corrections, and if the funding rates generally decrease. The overall euphoria, it's always a game of greed and fear, and as soon as the market gets a bit overheated, it's very healthy for the overall market, for altcoins, and for Bitcoin when a slight correction happens. And it's also important to understand that we should be grateful when these small corrections happen, because there's always the opportunity to adjust your portfolio and navigate it in the right direction, especially regarding individual altcoins. So I can recommend everyone to take a look at which altcoins, sectors, and industries are holding up best on a 24-hour basis, and which ones are getting hit a bit harder. And it's exactly in these mini corrections that you can see quite well which altcoins are most likely to perform best in the next upswing, because the same principle always applies here. The altcoins that hold up best during small corrections will perform significantly better in the next upswing compared to the altcoins that are currently being heavily punished. Of course, there are also individual outliers that cool down more significantly in relation to that, but you can generally observe which altcoins performed really well with the first Bitcoin upswing, which altcoins are still holding up well with Bitcoin now, and which ones might not have a strong core of investors in the project. And that's why you can navigate your own portfolio quite well here. In today's video, I don't want to specifically talk about altcoins, but by the way, there will be some videos coming out in the next few days about my top altcoins, including some new ones that I've partially bought up now, because of course you have to keep in mind that smaller corrections in the crypto market also offer huge opportunities to possibly buy up individual altcoins again. So especially opportunities that you might have missed, like OpenGPU, which is actually correcting a bit again. We took our time positioning ourselves as a community before this pump happened in 2024. We're in profit with such projects, so it's just an example here, but even if you missed that first upswing, it's always worth considering buying back in during individual corrections. Of course, it's also possible that OpenGPU comes back down to $1. That could happen, yes, back into the previous consolidation range, but nonetheless, individual corrections in certain altcoins always offer huge opportunities. So, I'm speaking from experience, and especially in phases like now, it's really worth it to buy up certain altcoins because right now, we're not in a stage where we need to worry too much about the exit itself. So, I've prepared some charts for you to support this thesis, specifically the altcoin chart, meaning the total crypto market cap excluding the top 10, or the total crypto market cap excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum. Here, all the altcoins are basically added up and presented as a chart. So here we have a representative view of the overall altcoin market, and based on that, we can definitely draw good conclusions about where the altcoin market currently stands and what stage we're in right now. And to tie it all together, let's talk about the overall thesis of why I think the bull run will actually end sooner than expected. So here we see the altcoin chart displayed, and the parallels compared to the last cycle are frighteningly similar. So here we had two altcoin tops, once in January 2018 and again in May 2018. These altcoin tops were then broken through in the next cycle, 2018 and in May, 2018-02 altcoin tops, which were then broken through in the next cycle. So here, December 2001, if we take a closer look at this, the parallels are actually frighteningly similar. So here at the end of December, the altcoins really went wild. Here, looking at the dates, October to December, altcoins began performing well. Q4 2020 was good. Q1 2021 saw major growth with market explosions. Those in the right projects saw even more potential. But even here, in those months, generally Q4 2020 was a relatively good quarter. But Q1 2021 was the quarter where the altcoins really went wild, where we saw some major altcoin explosions across the overall altcoin market. A six-fold increase was achieved, but even back then, if you positioned yourself in the right projects, there was definitely more potential than just a six-fold increase. But we also saw a similar behavior here. As soon as the all-time high was broken in the altcoin market from the previous cycle, we saw a huge explosion in the altcoin market. And even before all that happened, we had a sort of intermediate phase. So here I've marked what was previously a resistance level for that last top. And we see exactly this behavior again at the current moment. We had a strong resistance at these levels. So this was also a sort of intermediate top for the altcoins, once here, once there, which has now been sustainably broken through. But at this point, we haven't sustainably broken through the last all-time high yet. And I can tell you one thing, the altcoin season and the altcoins really start going wild, and these unexpected explosions, where you can see a five-fold increase overnight in your own portfolio, only happen in this phase. So really, it's only in this phase when a new price discovery happens, meaning a new price finding phase for the altcoins. Only then can we assume that the altcoin market and generally the portfolio focused on altcoins will perform the strongest. So here again, the exact Pareto principle applies. In the last 20% of the altcoin season, 80% of the performance and overall returns are achieved. And I expect exactly the same behavior at this current moment, of course. Yeah, one has to say, at the end of the day, I personally don't have a crystal ball. So it could definitely happen that this all takes place here. We are, as mentioned, on the 3-day chart. It could very well be that this happens directly next week and we shoot up extremely quickly. But I think the following scenario is much more realistic. If we consolidate a bit more here and let's say take another upswing and downswing before breaking out, and that would be exactly mid-January 2025, where the final breakout happens, and we can then expect the altcoins to really go wild. And this also reflects my thesis regarding Bitcoin dominance. In December, you still have the opportunity to buy, and maybe in January, you can also think about making some reinvestments. Hold from January to May, but I should also mention that you will most likely need to sell by then. So personally, to get back to the question, I only really start thinking about the exit of individual altcoins. In my opinion, it's still way too early to be seriously thinking about finding a final exit. Of course, it sometimes makes sense to build up some liquidity to be able to buy small corrections. It's never really smart to be 100% invested without having any liquidity left over, because then small corrections can hit a bit harder since you don't have any extra capital to buy in cheaper. But even if you're heavily invested right now, I think it makes a lot more sense to take a small correction in your own portfolio. It could be that your altcoins correct again by 10 to 15%, maybe even 25%, who knows. But I'd rather have a small loss in my portfolio in the short term, or I just take a little correction with some altcoins before I miss out on this gigantic rally upwards. The bull run will be shorter and more explosive than expected. In 2025, when the altcoin season happens, everything will move faster than you can imagine. So, I don't really know who among my viewers has already gone through the cycle, who was also around during the last altcoin season, but I can tell you one thing from experience. In 2025, when this altcoin season happens, everything will move faster and quicker than you can imagine, and that's a bit of the principle of the crypto market. The crypto market always does exactly the opposite of what the majority thinks, and I can easily imagine that there might still be a final shakeout, where some altcoins correct by 15 to 30%, catching many beginners off guard who have just been drawn in by the Bitcoin price. So, especially when you look at the mainstream media, you often see reports about Bitcoin like, yeah, Bitcoin is the next big thing, Bitcoin is the new trend. Yeah, that's how it's often presented in the mainstream media, and it's really just meant to attract new beginners, fresh faces who will eventually get washed out sooner or later. And that's exactly why small corrections are important, because the weak investors, the so-called weekenders, who only bought because they read about it somewhere in the newspaper, will always get washed out again when small corrections happen. In 2021, sooner or later, everything will happen all at once, making it practically impossible for the average investor who is new to the market to position themselves in time, because everything happens overnight. So that's always the principle behind it. Either nothing happens, yeah, the market bleeds out, or everything happens all at once. So, at the end of the day, those are the rules and principles of the crypto market, and that's why it's incredibly important for me to produce these videos for you. As I said, I don't have a crystal ball either, but for me personally in 2025, it's by far the most important thing to keep this overarching picture in mind. Yes, individual corrections can happen, but if you take a look at the overall overarching chart, you can see these waves that occur with the altcoins. Big upswing, downswing, upswing, downswing, and now the next big upswing is just about to come. It would just be unwise to let yourself get washed out of the market now or to think, hey, it's too late already. It's definitely not too late. Right now, I still think it's okay to buy into certain projects. At the latest then, but as I said, it's exactly the same chart, so you know, also the altcoin chart, at the latest, when a new all-time high is reached, I will definitely be more cautious. So I'll also be looking to possibly realize some profits or just take some initial gains in my own portfolio. But right now we're still in the green. As I said, it could very well be that we correct a little bit more, but right now the risk-reward ratio looks really good. We really need to keep in mind that sure, in the short term, we might see a little downward potential of a few negative percentages. Like I said, we might still have the potential for the altcoins to bleed a bit. But it's important to understand that we always have to think in terms of risk-reward ratio. So what's the current risk-reward ratio that we have? The risk we have right now is that altcoins might dip again by 10%, 15%, or even 20-25%. That's the current risk we face. But the potential we have is simply a gigantic altcoin season, and certain altcoins are going to deliver performances of 5x, 10x, 15x, or even 20x, or maybe even more. So, we need to look at the current state of the alcohol market in terms of a risk-reward ratio. And the whole risk-reward ratio, I've said it many times, but it's currently very positive, and it's simply a bet that I would take at any time. Just imagine you could go to a casino and you have a 50% chance of losing some of your money, but you also have a 50% chance of multiplying your capital tenfold. And exactly those kinds of bets make sense from a rational perspective when the odds are in your favor. So I personally always view the crypto market very rationally and always based on numbers. So something like a risk-reward ratio is, for example, a good parameter to pay attention to. The recent sell-off in Bitcoin dominance looks beautiful. Indicators speak for themselves. Again, the recent sell-off of Bitcoin dominance looks really beautiful, just as one would want it to. So all the indicators are currently speaking for themselves. Right now, there's absolutely no reason to worry, no reason to feel punished or scared. Yeah, I can definitely imagine that the fear and greed index might dip a bit again, washing out some newcomers from the market, and that some people might get a little panicky and scared before the next upswing happens. It's usually, as mentioned earlier, a back and forth between fear and greed in the market, so just keep that in mind. Overall, in my opinion, only about 20% of what's going to happen has actually happened. You can see it pretty well here in the logarithmic representation regarding the crypto market. About 120% has happened, and I think, all in all, from the absolute bottom, we're looking at around 1000% of what will take place here. It's, as I said, measured based on the last cycles. I can roughly imagine that the total crypto market will reach a market cap of 2 to a maximum of 3 trillion, So I think that's absolutely realistic. As I said, last time we managed to go from the general all-time high to the next all-time high, which was about 505% increase. And if I take the numbers from the last cycle and apply them here, it seems pretty realistic because, as I mentioned, the cycles are always weakening, the waters are leveling out more and more, so you can't really expect the numbers from the last cycle to be exactly one-to-one, especially when it comes to Bitcoin. The Bitcoin cycles themselves are also getting weaker simply because the market is getting bigger and therefore more liquidity is needed to make price jumps happen. So, you can roughly assume that in the altcoin market, about half of the last numbers will be reached. So, it was 505% from all-time high to all-time high last time, and this time I can imagine it being somewhere between, let's say, a minimum of 300% to a maximum of 500%. So, I take the numbers from the last cycle as a reference point, as an absolute maximum, and I think the minimum that's realistic is that the market cap will roughly triple. Around 2025, I'm going to start realizing some profits accordingly. It's not smart to wait until the target is reached, but I'll update you on my exit strategy. I'll make videos when I profit on altcoins, so it's advisable to subscribe to my channel and activate the bell to know my moves and strategy adjustments for my exit strategy. I've said everything I wanted. The cycle will run similarly to other cycles. There's the principle of sell in May, selling most of your position in May. So, at this point, it's really advisable for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and ideally activate the bell so you really know what moves I'm going to make and what strategy adjustments I'll be making when the time comes for the general exit, meaning my exit strategy. Otherwise, I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say. Overall, in my opinion, the cycle will also run relatively similarly to the other cycles, just as I mentioned earlier, and there's this general principle of sell in May, meaning that you sell off the majority of your position in May. This has also been proven very well based on the last cycles, showing that May has always been a very good month to realize some profits. This fits perfectly with my thesis that we might still make some last reinvestments in December, and then from January to May, the most is likely to happen. You can hold certain positions, take some partial profits, and by May at the latest, you need to make a final exit. That's how I personally see it, and that's how I'll act in my own portfolio. Otherwise, since I've talked about Bitcoin dominance quite a bit, you can definitely transfer that to altcoin dominance as well. Here, you can see the counterexample. Bitcoin dominance is slowly but surely breaking down, but it's still relatively high. A Bitcoin dominance of 55% is still quite high. And with the altcoins, we're still pretty much in the early stages. We haven't reached a new all-time high yet, and the last local high from 2024 hasn't been reached either. So, we can see roughly based on these parameters where we currently stand. That's why there's really no reason to worry about realizing profits right now. The probability is still extremely high that we're only in the early stages, maybe just the first 20% when it comes to altcoins. That's why it's still fine to build up individual positions. I'll show which altcoins I'm buying more of in the next YouTube videos. Thanks, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, otherwise you'll definitely be taken care of and kept updated regarding my videos. I sincerely thank you for your attention. Make sure to write 2001 in the comments about how you're currently approaching things, which altcoins you're keeping an eye on, or what you generally think about how the cycle will play out. I would definitely be very interested in that as well. But other than that, I would say see you in the next YouTube video, 2001.